and welcome to another video from City Self-Sufficiency. Today I thought we would have a look at what you can do to help keep your quail safe from predators. And this has come about because sadly a couple of weeks ago I lost one of my males, my favourite male actually, to a suspected weasel attack. Luckily everyone else was okay, but it does mean I've had to redouble my efforts to keep the quail in and the predators out. Unfortunately, quail are much more prone to predators than other poultry, mostly because they don't like to go inside at night. Instead, they'd rather just hunker down on the floor right in the middle of the run where they can see any approaching danger. Then, if something nefarious does come along, they fly up into the air in order to get away. Obviously, this doesn't really work when you're in a run and so they're trapped in there with their predator and you can't lock them in a nice safe house. And so it's up to us to keep the run as safe as we possibly can. Now, as I see it, there are basically 5 different types of predators that are going to be interested in your quail, and some of these are more difficult to deal with than others. Firstly, you have the large predators. These are your foxes, badgers, raccoons, anything that's got a bit of power behind them. You've got opportunistic predators, which is mostly going to be cats in an urban environment. Small predators, so weasels, snakes, anything that won't damage the run to get inside but is still just as deadly. Rats, which are everywhere and virtually impossible to avoid, and birds of prey. And we'll take a look at each one of these in turn. Firstly, the easiest of these groups to deal with are the opportunistic predators and the birds of prey, simply because just having your quail in a run will massively deter these predators. No cat is going to try to pull apart the wire in order to get in, and no bird of prey is going to risk getting stuck in a cage. So as long as you're being meticulous about making sure there are no gaps or weak points in your wire, then you should be able to keep them out quite easily. Small predators are much the same, but you need to think much more carefully about just how small some of them can be. My male was killed by a weasel who managed to squeeze through chicken wire just like this to get to him. He was only in the temporary run for 2 days while I patched up his actual run, and the weasel still managed to get him in that time, which just goes to show how often they are visiting the garden, even if you don't necessarily see them. Weasels and snakes are very narrow-bodied and flexible, and they can kill prey that is many times larger than themselves, and so you need to keep your quail behind a very strong but very narrow gauge of wire, such as this aviary mesh. And I tend to find the galvanised variety rather than the PVC coated is much better. The wire seems to be a little bit thicker as less of it's taken up with plastic. And you don't want the gaps between the wires to be any greater than 1 centimetre. This way you're limiting only the smallest of snakes being able to get in, and they won't be interested in something as big as a quail. And it's not only the wire that you need to be aware of, but also the gaps around the door. So if you look at this door, it is a much better design than this one. As you can see, the wood lies completely flush up against the wall so that there's no gaps, while this door on the other hand was one of the first ones that I ever built, and so it's not particularly sturdy and I have to prop it closed using a brick. Doors are a really obvious target for a predator, and I'll soon be switching this one out to something a little bit more safe. And here is where the problem with rats comes in. I've heard tales before of rats killing adult quail, but I don't really think that's normal behaviour. Normally rats will just want to eat the quail feed, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not still a big problem. And the thing is, they are perfectly able to chew their way into the run and create a remarkably big hole in a very short space of time. If you look at the back of this run, I had a rat trying to break in for a few nights in a row, and each of these holes were made in just 1 night. Not only is that big enough for a real predator to get in, it's big enough for the quail to get out. And this is just 1 night's damage. Rats are surprisingly powerful and tenacious little creatures, and they like to make a hole big enough for the entire family to wander through at their leisure. Stopping them chewing like this, luckily, is relatively simple. You just need to make sure the bottom of the run, to about 1 foot tall, is covered in the mesh. Don't be tempted to skimp on cost here and use a narrow chicken wire like this, for example, because rats can easily gnaw through it. And pay special attention to the corners where it's easier for a rat to make a start at chewing. Make sure that you're monitoring your run, checking it every couple of days at least to look for any holes that are coming along. If you find anywhere where rats are trying to get in, cover it immediately with mesh. Personally, I don't find poisoning them or killing them works at all. There are always more rats to take the place. It's better to just secure the run. And then we come to the larger predators, which in a city environment are most likely to be foxes or raccoons or possums, depending on where you live. And here the main problem isn't just their size, but also their strength and the fact that they are very, very clever. To stop them tearing their way into your quail run, you need to be using that aviary mesh again, obviously. And you also need to use a nice strong attachment method. So I use these 12mm heavy duty staples, and they're rust resistant and they really grip onto the wood. So much so that once I've stapled the mesh down, I can't actually pull it off. And this is pretty much how I test it. If I can't pull it out, then I'm sort of assuming that a fox can't neither. And my run is also situated onto concrete so that predators can't burrow their way in. If you don't have that option, it's a good idea to dig the mesh into the ground, down to a depth of at least a foot, just to deter any diggers from trying to get in there. On the note of the door as well, in the past I've made the mistake of using one of these bolts to keep the run door shut. Big mistake. Foxes can easily open these locks, and I imagine a raccoon could figure it out in minutes as well. Make sure you are padlocking the door closed at night. As far as I know, no fox has learned how to use a key yet, and even if it's only a small lock, it will prevent them from being able to pull that door open. Predators are sadly a fact of life when you keep a small, defenceless animal like quail outside. They have far more predators than, say, a chicken or any other kind of poultry, and you really do need to be meticulous in inspecting their run for any damage. And it's one of these cases where sadly you can't skimp on the cost. I can say from experience it is much better to buy the expensive wire now and keep your birds alive than lose them to a cheap bit of chicken wire. Ultimately though, what you use and how you prevent predators in your area will depend on what kind of things you have prowling around that are looking at your quail. But if you have any suggestions at all on how to reduce the chances of an attack, I would love to hear about them, as I'm sure anybody else who is interested in keeping these lovely little birds would as well. But I hope you've enjoyed this little video, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye! Hello, seeing as you've made it to the end of the video, I thought I'd just do a tiny little plug and just let you know that I have a second channel that I've recently started up. It's going to be all about little animals and aquaria that I keep, so I thought I would just let you know about it in case you wanted to check it out. But if not, that's cool too. Anyway, see you later.